Yo, what's going on, everybody? This is Nothing But Bangers, aka MBB, aka Bangers, aka I've got a lot of tournament news and I slimmed it down to just 3 of the biggest tournaments from this weekend. You're going to be shocked when you get these results because it is a big change, but some of us might have seen this coming. If you've been watching my previous videos, I would tell you that a lot of what I was talking about from the power rankings and the previous breakdown from last week that I had of the tournaments, it really foreshadowed what we saw this past weekend in the biggest tournaments. So if you're interested in playing some of the best decks and hearing about how some of the best decks are kind of coming to form in the meta, definitely hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on, and don't forget to leave a comment so that way you can tune in the conversation as well. But I'm telling you, everything that we basically talked about last week pretty much came true. So let's get to it. So what I did is I went through the 3 biggest tournaments in terms of prize support along with a combination of participants, and I'm going to talk about some of this data really quickly for you. I don't want to keep you too long because I do think that if you haven't watched last week's videos about my power rankings and about the recap of what happened last week in terms of the deck choices, you should definitely check that out after this video. So let's get into the results. So the first tournament that I'm going to be talking about, you can see had a pretty healthy $100 US dollar prize pool, which is pretty healthy for some people, especially if you live in a country where maybe the US dollar is valued pretty highly. But when you take a look at the variants that you're seeing at the top of this list, you're going to see 3 things that stand out. First of all, Mewtwo has really surpassed almost every other deck and almost doubled the size of every other deck, right? I mean, it's pretty much taking up a big giant piece of the meta. And a lot of this is coming from what we talked about last week with Mewtwo, the base Mewtwo, being input into the deck. Now, what you're also noticing is a surge, pun intended, of Raichu variants, okay? Now, the results for the Raichu variant were very interesting. I'll talk about that here in a second. But just to give you an idea, it's kind of shaping from that big 3 that we've been talking about. It's now pretty much a big 2. Charizard is kind of still hanging around, but honestly, it's basically the Mewtwo and Pikachu show, okay? That's basically what it is. So let's talk about the standings from this tournament. So again, this is the end of the tournament, and you'll notice there's a lot of Mewtwo. I mean, you have to go down the list for a while before you see a Pikachu deck. And so what you're seeing here is Mewtwo is basically starting to dominate the tournament scene in a lot of ways in terms of participation and people bringing it and in the top cut. And I'm going to do another breakdown and talk about the actual choices of cards in these decks. And I might upload a little bit of footage to go along with it. So stay tuned for that because I know a lot of you have been wanting to see the deck in action, which honestly, if you play the game, you've probably seen Mewtwo in action. But it's okay. I have no problem doing that. But basically, when you take a look at the playing to win, okay, if you take a look at the bracket, you'll notice that, I mean, it's just dominated by Mewtwo. And Mewtwo is basically taking up almost the majority of all spots. Like, for this tournament, a lot of people would classify Mewtwo based on just this tournament as being tier 0. When it takes 65% of the top cut, a lot of people would classify that deck as being tier 0. However, I would push back on that and say, hey, maybe it's not a 1-deck tier 0 format. It may be a 2-deck tier 0 format. So this is an Ursis tournament, which has grown to be the largest tournament that we see every weekend for Pokemon Pocket. And you can see the distribution of decks a little bit differently here because you'll notice that it's going to be mostly Mewtwo and Pikachu making up a large part of the field. Now there's different variants of Pikachu, but you'll notice again 102 Raichu variants, which is up, okay? That's higher than it's ever been before. More people are bringing Raichu, and they're bringing it for a lot of the reasons that we talked about last week, including, I'm telling you, that power rankings video. And again, in that video, one of the things that I highlighted, I said, hey, if I was playing this weekend in some of these tournaments, I'll probably be bringing Raichu just because it has a chance to compete with those Mewtwo decks. And in the mirror, Raichu can do a lot of damage. So looking at this again, you can see a lot of people brought those 2 decks, and then Charizard is still hanging around, kind of hanging around. But again, when you take a look at the standings, okay, notice a lot of Mewtwo, a lot of Pikachu. Okay, now shout out to Ursi and Ursi and their whole team that changed up a little bit of, this top cut. I believe it was top 32 technically is what we got out of this. Yeah, top 32. And again, like if you wanted to make an argument that Pikachu, or excuse me, Mewtwo in this case, was a tier 0 deck, I mean, you kind of have a little bit of an argument. I mean, when you take a look at this top cut, it is going to be mostly Mewtwo and mostly Pikachu. So like when we talk about a tier 0 format, what we're basically saying is that no deck has a good matchup against both of the top 2 tier decks. Okay, because again, this is me basically saying we're basically in a tier 0 format where no deck can consistently beat Mewtwo and Pikachu. It's basically one or the other. You're going to have a pretty good matchup, and then you're going to probably struggle in the other matchup. So some key examples would be, let's take a look at this Arcanine list, right? This Arcanine list is going to do really, really well into Pikachu, but against Mewtwo, it's probably going to get folded, right? However, if you scroll down here a little bit, you may run into some water decks, and some of these water decks are going to struggle with Pikachu, but if they get that turn 2 Starmie EX, right, or they high roll with Misty, they can definitely compete with the Mewtwo variants. And then another deck that's not necessarily in this top cut, but it would be the dark decks, right? The dark decks are probably one of the closest things that can kind of counter both of these decks if you draw really, 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 really well. Because again, Arbok can kind of trap EX Pokemon after they've already secured one knockout. Okay, so that's definitely a possibility. We may see more dark decks pop up going into this coming weekend. However, again, Charizard's a great example. Not great into Pikachu, but it really does a really good job of walling off those Mewtwo decks. Now, granted, base Mewtwo and Jinx variants, they do still have a fighter's chance, especially those Jinx variants, okay? So again, just taking a look at this, again, the previous tournament, Mewtwo won, and then also in this tournament, it's going to be a Mewtwo finals. Okay, so Mewtwo is pretty much just dominating. Again, I'm just trying to show you these. I'm just trying to give you a picture so you kind of know what you're going into if you decide to play in these tournaments. Okay, and again, we'll talk about like, is this healthy for the game kind of towards the end. But that'll be basically my big, that'll be my title. That'll be my thumbnail. We are now in what I would refer to as a tier 0 format. Okay. And so, some people are going to not agree with me on that, and that's perfectly fine. You can talk about that in the comments. But when I look at these numbers, when I see how much these 2 decks are dominating, to me, this is a classic tier 0 format where 2 decks are just better than everything else. Like if you're bringing something else, you're going to need to get mad lucky to even get into top cut. And then you're going to need to get mad lucky again to compete and get to that top 4, top 2. Okay. So this is the Pokemon Pocket Legends League. By the way, I usually try to tell you about their tournaments on Tuesdays and Fridays the latest. So that way you can get prepared for, they do a pretty interesting tournament on Wednesdays where they might go ahead and, they might have like a ban on a certain rule, right? They might have no EXs allowed. And then on the weekends, they usually do like a traditional tournament like you're seeing right here. So again, when you take a look at this, you're going to see a lot of Raichu variants, right? And what's really interesting about this, look at the win percentage, 57% win percentage in a pretty healthy volume of games, okay? So again, when you take a look at the variants, and we'll break down the variants and the card choices in another video, but this is just try to get your feet wet, and again, to give you time to check back, just in case you haven't, last week's videos on the power rankings specifically, that'll definitely help you. But again, you just take a look at Mewtwo, Pikachu just dominating the meta, and Charizard getting a small slice of the pie. Again, it is a big 2-deck format. That's pretty much it. And when you take a look at the top cut, let's take a look at the top cut, and you can see the bracket here. But again, they do an asymmetric cut. If you don't know what that is, basically everybody who's X2 gets into day 2. Some people get buys, some people don't, and then they play out the rest of the top cut. So you can kind of scroll through this again. You can check this out on your own, but I will be doing my own breakdown and helping you take a look at some of the tech choices, because again, that's going to be where people really make a difference in their decks, right? The meta has shifted in the past month. It has shifted quite a bit, and it's continuing to kind of morph into a new thing every week. But I think from here on out, until we see the mini set, we're going to see these 2 decks just dominate, okay? And in the finals, we saw a Mewtwo and Pikachu matchup, and Mewtwo ended up winning 2-0. Okay, so again, when you take a look at just the way that things are shaping out, we are entering a tier 0 format where 2 decks are just better than everything else. If you're bringing Charizard, good luck, okay? If you're bringing, Marowak, whatever, good luck. If you're bringing Machamp and Mankey, you better be running hot, like this person probably was, right? So again, it's just one of those things where, is it good for the game? Okay, I mean, this is where it gets kind of interesting. In the sense, is it good for the game? It's not healthy for like diversity of decks, right? Like that was one of the coolest things about the first few weeks of tournaments, right? We saw a lot of different decks, and every now and then, we'll get like one deck a week now that kind of stands out. But again, it's got a really good matchup against Pikachu, or it's got a good matchup against Mewtwo, and it's bad against the other one, But basically, is this good for the game? I would probably say it's probably one of those things that's just going to happen. And so you kind of just have to understand that that's just the way it is, right? It's not going to be like this every format. We're not going to have just 2 decks just straight up dominate to this level. That will not be the case all the time. But with such a limited card pool and how much time we've had to fine tune these cards and these deck choices, it has just spiraled into this point. Before it was rock, paper, scissors, and you still had Mewtwo and Pikachu kind of going back and forth 50-50, but now it's kind of like, well, one Pikachu variant might have a better matchup than the others against Mewtwo. It's just kind of still up for debate a little bit. So there's still some nuance to those 2 decks going against each other. But again, those 2 decks are just a lot better than just about every other deck in the game. So it's good in a sense that the 2 best decks that you can build if you're starting the game. It's bad if people start to get annoyed or tired of seeing the same decks all the time in every format that they play, whether it's an event, whether it's a tournament, or whether they're just randomly queuing into the game. It can get a little stale. So this mini set that's coming out, it's going to have a lot of pressure to at least change up things just a little bit. And then again, when we get to the end of January, when we get the first new set, it's going to have a lot of eyes on it, because a lot of people are going to be wondering by then, like, hey, what, is the meta finally going to change? Are we going to finally get out of this tier 0 format? I will tell you, in other games that we have tier 0 formats, a lot of the time bans happen or restrictions happen. However, with the way that the developers have talked about it for Pokemon Pocket, I don't think that we'll see that. I think that they will just let things play out, especially with the mini set. And I'm telling you, I'm actually really excited for the mini set, and I'm extremely excited for the full set at the end of January. So we're going to take baby steps, and we're going to keep breaking down these tournaments. But again, it's a tier 0 format between 2 decks, and every other decks are just not as good. But 60+% of the top cuts in these bigger tournaments where, in my opinion, these are the most competitive tournaments, not to disrespect any other tournaments. But in my opinion, these are the most competitive tournaments, and you're seeing, 2 decks just straight up dominate. And really this week, it was just Mewtwo just dominated everything, right? Like, it's not even really like it's 1-2, Pikachu 1-1 and Mewtwo 1-2. No, Mewtwo swept all 3 of these tournaments, right? Including beating Pikachu in the finals. So take that for what you will. And again, stay tuned to the end of this video, because those videos that I've been telling you about from last week are going to be popping up soon. Until next time, I will catch you later, and I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your day to let me be background noise. Maybe you like tuning into the content, but I hope to see you more around on the channel and on Twitch, where I do live stream as much as I can. Peace!